Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
Local Sports Roundup brought to you by Carpet City Flooring Center here this morning. So this week, looking back at this week before we kind of take a look ahead to what's coming up, well, you checked out some hockey, didn't you, the other nights?
Yes. Well, Tuesday and Thursday.
Tuesday and Thursday?
Yeah, it was a bit of a hockey week for me this week. So.
Yeah. And did Memorial beat North last night too, I think?
Yes, in boys hockey.
Yep.
A bit around the Big Rivers boys hockey last night. I think it was 6-3. Memorial picking up the big win over North in the intra-city showdown. I was at Triple Ice Arena where Chippewa Falls beat Menominee 5-0. So, I mean, currently looking at the Big Rivers right now, you get Hudson up top. They're unbeaten in conference play. You got New Richmond a game back. You got a Memorial a game and a half back because, remember, they've got that tie in there with Chippewa from the start of Big Rivers play. So that's going to throw a bit of a monkey wrench in the proceedings here. But those teams we're getting pretty close here we're pretty quick. We're going to be starting that second run through for conference play. But I mean, as always, the Big River, especially that upper half is pretty challenging, and there's some big matchups on the horizon. I know Chippewa Falls hosts New Richmond next Tuesday. That'll be obviously a battle of two teams at the top half there. But we're starting to see who's who in the Big Rivers, and it's a lot of the teams that are usually who's who in the Big River. So, but boys basketball, I kind of mentioned it last Friday, but going back there. The big Eau Claire Memorial Hudson matchup, and that was a matchup that the Old Abes picked up the win in. So they're still, and it's funny because that was a big matchup last week. They beat Hudson 63-53, and then tonight it's another matchup of the top teams in the Big Rivers for boys basketball. You got Memorial taking on Rice Lake. Rice Lake's unbeaten. They broke into the rankings this week. That game is over at Eau Claire Memorial. So
that should be a really good game.
Should be if you're looking for a game to go tonight. That's a good one. There's kind of a bunch of games going on, but obviously you got North too. They're going over to Chippewa, so I'll be spending a little bit of time there tonight as well. That's what the Huskies. And no matter the sport, when the Huskies and the Carls get together, it's always a good one. In the going in the Western Clover Belt, there's another couple of big matchups there too. Fall Creek hosting Bloomer. Bloomer and Stanley Boyd are still unbeaten early in the Western Clover Belt schedule. Fall Creek has one loss, but picked up a big win Tuesday night over Regis. So Fall Creek is 2-1 in conference play. They're right on the heels of both of those teams. Another game I'm going to be spending a little time at is going to be at McDonald, which Stanley Boyd and McDonald. Stanley Boyd, 2 conference wins this week, a makeup game with Cadott, and then Tuesday beating Thorpe. So they're 3-0 in conference play. An explosive Orioles team that's 7-3 right now, and they got McDonald, a team that's 7-4. Last night they picked up a non-conference win over Arcadia, so they get a quick turnaround. But that should be an interesting matchup. Both those teams are pretty deep, so that's going to be. After tonight, obviously we're going to have some more lessons learned as far as the Western Clover. We're still a long way to go. But that's anytime you can get a win over one of those teams, and even in the Dun St. Croix, you've got a matchup of top teams with Spring Valley hosting Elk Mound. Both those teams unbeaten early on in the conference schedule. Both those teams only with one loss. So that's a monster game here early in the Dun St. Croix on the boys' end of things.
I know you were at wrestling the other day, and the reason I bring that up too is because Chippewa Falls is unbeaten in Big Rivers, right, for wrestling. And
correct.
You mentioned Chi-Hi and North. That's always interesting when they get together. Could that be the same for wrestling?
It could. The way it kind of works out right now with the scheduling is Chippewa Falls still has to wrestle in conference duels against Menominee, North, and Hudson, who are 3 of the other really good teams in the conference. And those will be coming up here in the next few weeks. So. Okay. We're going to get a lot of that kind of crossover, so to speak, with those, those teams all matching up with each other. So, we're starting to, once you get past January, you really start to get into it. Like tomorrow for wrestling, you got Cadott hosting their big annual invite, boys and girls. There's a lot of teams there. That's a pretty good. I always kind of look at that as a bit of kind of a line of demarcation of like, okay, now we're really we're getting into it. Then next weekend, Chi-Hi hosts their annual invite as well, and there's a lot of teams from the area around here too. So. Once you get into January, you kind of start to see not just some of the teams, but really some of the individual wrestlers emerging. Who's who, and who might be those contenders for conference championships, regionals, sectionals. Making a push to state.
Would you say, you could correct me but for wrestling, because basketball, it's like conference play right now, and hockey and that too. Wrestling, it's a little bit of a mixture. They got the invitational still.
Right,
and
yeah, because
conference.
you've got the duels. And I know last night the Cloverbelt got underway with their, triangulars that they'll do. So they'll, you'll start to see them kind of, so obviously some teams winning and losing there as well in conference matchups, but they didn't have any before the break. But yeah, it's always such a mix because obviously you want to win your conference championship and stuff, but at the same time you also have these big on weekend tournaments where to me it's like the duels are for the teams and the tourneys are almost for the individuals, even though you can win a team championship at a tournament. Like that's more of like, your individual wrestlers kind of showing their stuff. Like, okay, what's going on, how do I stack up against some of these other, teams? Because that's where you're seeing some of the teams you're not seeing a lot.
Okay.
If you're a Big Rivers team and you're going to say Merrill, I think Chippewa Falls goes to Merrill tomorrow. You're probably not going to see a ton of like Big Rivers teams there, but you're going to see teams probably from the Wisconsin Valley. I know Stanley Boyd goes there, and they've got some good wrestlers. So like,
does it kind of help prepare like for state and regionals?
And wrestling is. I was having this conversation with somebody last night. Is one of the things I really like about wrestling is one of those sports where really the size of the enrollment, the division of your team doesn't really matter that much. If you're a really good Division III team, you can go and wrestle a D1 team. I think of some of the really good teams like a Cadets had over the years. Or even like last night, Chippewa Falls wrestled Ellsworth, and it was a close duel. It was like 37-33. Ellsworth's got to always have a really good wrestling team. Yeah. So, you can, and you go like earlier on, you go back last month, there was the big dual tournament that was held in Wisconsin Dells. Oh, yeah. Like you had cadet wrestling, Division I size teams and, other small teams wrestling big teams. That's not really that, that doesn't really matter that much because if you're just a good small school team and you fill out a full lineup, it doesn't matter. Like you can go and wrestle some of those big schools. And obviously there's many sports where you can't really do that just because of the different, just kind of, you're not going to see Division IV schools a lot of times playing Division I in basketball or in football or something like that. Right. For obvious reasons, but in wrestling you can do that. And that's the cool thing about wrestling. That's why like if you go to any of these tournaments, you'll see such a variety of teams. Where you can see for many years Chippewa Falls went to Cadet. And that might be about the only sport where Chippewa Falls and Cadet ever competed against each other. It's just one of those sports you can do that. Right. And that's why one of the things that makes wrestling so cool is you can see such a big variety of competition, and now ultimately that's what you want when you get to the postseason, especially if you're a smaller school. If you can be exposed to tournaments where you're wrestling, kids from the Big Rivers or wherever, that's just going to help.
Would you say it's kind of similar in a way of like the golf teams because it's like it's an individual but team sport almost?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And sometimes you'll see some smaller teams. I know in the last few years when like McNally Regis boys golf was right at its peak and went to state a couple years ago, like they would go down south and they were playing big time Division I programs because they wanted to be tested. And you can. Right.
Because it's like golf, you're just kind of playing the course.
Right. It's not there's nothing physical about going up against somebody else. Or like football, obviously, it's a little bit different. And you would think, well, wrestling's a physical sport, but it's not the same. In wrestling, you're always wrestling somebody your own size.
Exactly.
It's not like
it's not like the left tackle that's 300 pounds at that school, but a smaller school might be 220.
Correct. Correct.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. So good point. Yeah. All right, quickly, before we take a quick break, we got Blue Gold stuff coming up here. A busy weekend for some Blue Gold and Stout athletics. Speaking of wrestling, the Blue Gold wrestling team, they're at the Bud Whitehall duels, going up against some good competition, traveling all across the country here. Women's hockey for the Blue Golds taking on Concordia. Men's going to be taking on the Milwaukee School of Engineering. Basketball, the women's team is going to be on the road taking on River Falls. Men will be home tomorrow taking on River Falls. And then for Stout this weekend, both the men's and women's teams will be taking on Whitewater. Women's going to be visiting Whitewater. Men will be home against Whitewater. Men's hockey taking on Concordia College as well. All right, that's your local sports roundup. Again, brought to you by Carpet City Flooring Center.